Back in the day, I was a 5-star quarterback recruit by every major recruiting publication, but I still don't even know like how these sites work or where they came from. So today we're figuring it out. Recruiting rankings feed into the billion-dollar industry that is college football, but do we even know who's calling the shots behind the scenes? When I was a recruit, the big three were Scout.com, Rivals.com, and ESPN. Then 24/7 Sports came in and shook things up. And then now On3's come out of nowhere, and I'm still trying to figure out where they came from. How much do coaches actually rely on these sites, and how have they changed over the past 25 years? Let's dive in. The motivation for this video, I had a friend look me dead in the eye and say, Max, what is On3? Where did they come from? And how do they have the top dog spot? And I did not have an answer to any of those questions. But after diving in, it all traces back to the birth of the online recruiting rankings. Alliance Sports was founded in 1995, based out of Nashville, and they were the first legitimate recruiting online service. They were founded by Shannon Terry, remember that name, and Greg Goff. Rivals.com came around in 1998, founded by Jim Heckman. Unfortunately, Rivals followed the trajectory of the dot-com bubble and collapsed in 2001. Alliance Sports then purchased all of Rivals.com's assets and relaunched the website. In 2001, when Heckman was fired as CEO, he started a spin-off competitor called Scout.com. Side note, to me, in my world, Scout.com is the premier service. When I was in high school, like peak freshman, sophomore, junior year, when you're always looking at recruiting rankings, Scout was the premier service. I can remember the signing day of my junior year of high school. Ironically, that's my birthday. That's when they came out with their star rankings for that whole class. And I'll never forget, first star ranking, I was a 5-star from the jump, but it was me and 2 other guys. It was Shane Morris, who went to Michigan, and Tyrone Swoops, who went to Texas. I remember pulling out of the student parking lot in my buddy's like Honda Accord, because he like drove me to school, and the rankings had like just been released. It's like right when Twitter started to become like, ooh, people are posting sports news on Twitter. What a time. But back to the story. Rivals then became profitable and then was bought by Yahoo in 2007. Then in 2010, Shannon Terry, who had just sold Rivals to Yahoo, started 24/7 Sports. Then to overlay another layer here, in February 2017, 24/7 Sports acquired Scout.com. Then in 2020, Shannon Terry, yep, that same Shannon Terry left the company. But we know Shannon Terry's not going anywhere. So in 2021, he launches On3. And this is the first platform to emphasize NIL along with all the traditional elements of a recruiting service. Max, who's this Shannon Terry guy? Like we talked about, he sold his first company, Alliance Sports, to Rivals.com for $3 million. And then when it went under, he bought it back for 500 grand. Terry kept all of the Rivals.com branding and then rapidly turned a profit by way of a subscription-based model. He grew the subscription base to over 230,000 subscribers before selling it to Yahoo in 2007 for reportedly 98 million. In 2010, he founded 24/7 Sports, which then he sold to CBS in 2015. And then like we talked about, 2021 launches On3, and that is the gold standard now. At least to me, as someone who doesn't consume the message boards every single day, but I see the social media graphics. The rise of recruiting services with the digital age can be divided into 4 different time frames. First one, the pre-internet era. I'm calling this before the late 90s. This was all about word of mouth and limited exposure. Before the internet, recruiting was a mystery. A handful of scouts and especially high school coaches held the keys to recruiting. It was all about word of mouth, and game film was sent by way of mail. The reliance on coaches to help a high school player get recruited was paramount. There was no huddle. It was all DVD and VHS. Recruiting was very regional focused. If you grew up in the Northwest, it was difficult to get noticed in the Southeast. And where did all these rankings live? Well, newspaper rankings were big. Then we have the early internet recruiting. I'm calling this the late 90s, early 2000s. This is where we see the birth of the online rankings. Rivals was the first to publicly rank recruits. Scout.com came in as a competitor to Rivals, only expanding national coverage. Then in the early 2000s, ESPN entered the recruiting space, adding credibility. Then in 2010, 24/7 Sports came around, introducing the composite rankings. This combined all major ranking services. There were 3 impacts from this era. First, the star ranking became the norm. Whether you were a 2-star or a 5-star, that became the measuring system for a recruit. There was a lot more national exposure. Whether you were from a smaller school or a smaller city, you could still get known by the biggest of programs. And then 3, we're seeing earlier commitments. Offers not happen in junior, senior year, but freshman, sophomore year. Then we have the social media era. I'm calling this from 2010 to present day. The player-driven recruiting revolution. The major shifts that happen, social media becomes a legitimate recruiting tool. I always say I'm an interesting age bracket in this because I was part of the 2013 class. I remember when I committed to USC, I tweeted it out like, oh, I'm committed to USC. And that was like my first big Twitter moment. I hadn't even thought about communicating with coaches on Twitter versus anyone younger than me communicating on Twitter or now Instagram. Shoot, it's probably even TikTok now. That's the norm. I also remember my first year. So when I was a freshman in 2009 going into 2010, so my 2010 film, I remember sending out DVD copies of my game film to every major school in the country. I had boxes of it, just sending it out. But then my junior year film in 2011, that was all on Hudl. And that's the second major shift of this generation. Hudl revolutionized how coaches and scouts and players deal with game film. This is also where we start to see the rise of not only recruiting camps, but 7-on-7 football and leagues. One of the best moments in my entire recruiting process was playing in the opening. So many of those guys that were in that game are NFL superstars. My running back was Alvin Kamara. Imagine him, 7-on-7. I'm a 17-year-old kid, get Alvin Kamara on a swing route, game over. Recruiting changed for athletes during this era because athletes could build up a persona and build up an online brand and create buzz around their recruitment that you couldn't do before. To take it a step further, guys are actually getting offers before they played in a varsity game. That's ironic coming from me because that happened to me, but it was not because of social media. But it was because of a 7-on-7 tournament. That's facts. UW 7-on-7 tournament. We won that title game against the rivals. Sark came over to Cheryl and Mike Browne and dropped the offer. Recruiting changed for coaches during this era because you had immediate access to game film, whether it's a football player, it's about basketball film, stats, everything. Also led to more pressure to recruit guys earlier. You now are getting exposure and film to guys in 8th, 9th, 10th grade. I'd argue this led to the decommitment trends that we saw. There's also just more data in general, which gives coaches more opportunities to evaluate the nuances of a high school kid that you never had access to before. And then the fourth era, I'm calling this the NIL era. It overlaps with the third era, but it's from 2021 to present day. Players can now legally earn money on their name, image, and likeness. Recruiting now has real financial implications. Players are not choosing a school just because of football, but also because of their earning potential. And as a result, a site like On3 launches NIL valuations, which, to be honest, I always wonder how accurate they are. Just like anything, it's built on relationships, but a lot of this stuff is just word of mouth, kind of just trusting what the market says. This era changed recruiting because it boosted the power of certain schools that didn't have this level of power in a different era. Schools like Texas A&M or Miami. The transfer portal becomes a lot more active, and honestly, that's how I use On3 today, is tracking transfer portal news. And then nowadays, the top recruits are considering more than just football. I can tell you firsthand, if I was in this era, it would not have been about just going to a blue blood program. That was a big factor for me. No, I would have had to pay attention to the money and what the market was offering. So how has all this changed since I was a recruit? I'm 30 years old now. I'm 12 years removed from this. I'm an old man now. In the 2013 recruiting era, like we talked about, star rankings and team offers mattered the most. I told you about my parking lot story, but I also remember like my USC recruiting class in 2013, we had the highest average star ranking of any class ever at that point. We were in the middle of sanctions, so we only could take 13 guys, 12 guys, and it was half 5 stars and the rest were 4 stars, so our average star ranking was crazy. Hudl was emerging, but film was still mailed. I talked about that. I mailed my film after my sophomore year. For my junior year, it was putting together a Hudl film and just sending out the link. Commitment announcements were simple. I remember being so nervous of like pissing off another coach by throwing a hat or doing a shirt or whatnot. Maybe that's just a me thing, but now they're all crazy. The whole like showing a dog came after me. I was the era that it turned. Anything after 2013 got kind of crazy. Anything before was kind of tame, except for the Landon Collins one. His was the first controversial one when his mom or aunt or sister, I forget who it was, got upset. Yeah, that was not pretty. Transfer portal existed, but it wasn't common. A better way to say this is the transfer rule was still in place. You transfer, you got to sit out a year. I'm going to talk about that in a minute. That is a groundbreaking change. And then NIL wasn't legal. Key word there, legal. Not saying it didn't happen. I remember going to the opening and a big time linebacker who you guys would all know had a very successful career, walks into his hotel room and has a brown bag of money sitting on the front table there. So I hear. That is recruiting when you're a big time 5-star linebacker in the Southeast, not necessarily when you're a pocket passer quarterback from the Northwest. I never got offered anything. I missed out, man. So the big questions are, do these rankings actually work and how reliant are coaches upon them? Publicly, coaches are always going to downplay recruiting services. It's not going to be like, oh, we pay attention to rankings. No, we're all about fit for our program. Privately, though, they absolutely care about recruiting rankings. Their jobs depend on the type of recruiting class they bring in. It's certainly made the process more efficient and streamlined everything from a film watching side of things to getting in contact with kids to the random recruit that would have fallen through the cracks. Hey, just a 3-hour drive away from you. That kid's not falling through the cracks anymore. And then also, like I said, for coaches keeping up with all the transfer portal madness, you might build a really good relationship with a kid when he's 17 years old. He goes to a different school. He hops into the portal at 19, 20 years old. You rekindle that relationship. The downside of the online recruiting services, though, is it can overhype players. I remember the guys in my class, in my state that they created an online buzz because they ran a fast 40 in shorts and t-shirt or had a cool clip that went semi-viral in a 7-on-7 camp, and they become kind of the 7-on-7 legends rather than, hey, actually showing out when the pads are on. You also have late bloomers that fall through the cracks. If this process is starting earlier and earlier, if it's going at 9th, 10th grade, but you're a kid who doesn't hit puberty until you're a junior in high school, there can be guys that you're better than as a junior or senior, but because their clock and recruiting process started so much earlier, they get a higher ranking. And then the last downside is just this NIL transfer portal chaos. I can't even imagine doing the whole transfer portal process without the internet. So, I mean, I guess the internet's a good thing for that. But again, these NIL evaluations are all word of mouth and all just trusting relationships. It's not like the NFL where we have a contract that's public, that everyone knows the terms of that contract, or at least for the most part, the base terms. People don't know the base terms about Carson Beck's deal at Miami. Maybe if you have a hookup with a Miami booster, you do, but like mainstream wise, nah, it doesn't happen. And do these recruiting ranking services actually work? Yes, they work. The whole adage that stars don't matter is a load of crap. Every national champion since 2003 has had at least one top 10 recruiting class during that time frame. The last 10 national champions have averaged at least 50% blue chippers on their roster, meaning 4- and 5-star guys. Some quick numbers for us. 21% of 5-stars get drafted in the first round. 56% get drafted overall. Sorry, I'm part of the 44% there. A 5-star recruit is 7 times more likely to be drafted than a 3-star recruit. Yeah, I'm not helping that percentage. 4-star recruits, 20% get drafted in the NFL. 3-star recruits, 10% make the NFL. I wonder if that's just make a preseason roster or actual roster. And then 2-star recruits, less than 1% make it to the NFL. I'm glad I made this video because I had no idea that basically 2 guys, Shannon Terry and Jim Heckman, basically started all the different sites that are somewhat relevant today. It does hurt my heart that scout.com is like not a thing anymore. And I'm aging myself. There's probably someone watching this right now who is a recruit or a aspiring college football recruit that's like, Max, scout.com. I'm telling you, they had the best interface. You'd open it up, you had like a clean pictures. I remember just scrolling, it was clean. We would sit, remember in computer production class, 4th period, I'd have the Seattle Times blogs on one monitor and we'd have the scout.com rankings on the other. And then I'd have my homies be like, yo, who's this dude out in Missouri that's getting this offer today? It was peak memories there. Anyways, if you like this video, there's more to come. I'm posting football content every single day. I'm Max Browne. I appreciate you guys sitting down and hanging with me. Hit that subscribe button to not miss any content. And if you like this video, hit the like button as well. Thanks, guys.